Hello viewers, welcome back to Economic Wise. My name is Zubar Mudupe and I will be taking you guys macroeconomics today. So the topic we'll be looking at is the ISLM model. Yeah, this is our course guidelines. Firstly, we'll be looking at the introduction to ISLM curve. We'll also look at the IS curve. Under the IS curve, we explain what the Keynesian cross is, and also the LM curve. Then we explain what the theory of liquidity preference is. As the ISLM curve contains two different models, which is the IS curve and the LM curve, and the Keynesian cross forms the basis of the IS curve. The theory of liquidity preference forms the basis of the LM curve. So now it is worthy to note that we might not be able to cover up everything in this video. That is, we'll be considering only the IS curve for now. And under this IS curve, we are only going to explain the basis of the IS curve, which is the Keynesian cross diagram. We aren't going to establish how the model is actually derived. Also, it is worthy to note that the ISLM curve is a model of John Maynard Keynes, who actually tries to understand what causes the Great Depression of the 1930s. The ISLM curve will help you understand what causes economic fluctuation and how the economic fluctuation of the economy developed based on the various policies that is made by the government and even the central bank. Now, the ISLM curve shows the relationship between national income and interest rates. Let's just put this in mind. I'm not here to confuse you, but just have this in mind that the ISLM curve shows a relationship between the national income and the interest rates. And the basis of this ISLM curve is what we call the Keynesian cross and the theory of liquidity preference. Now let's write on. Let's explain the IS curve. Like I have said that the IS curve forms the basis, or the basis of the IS curve lies in the Keynesian cross diagram. A basic understanding of the Keynesian cross diagram will aid the explanation of the IS curve, and that's why I want to take my time to explain the Keynesian cross diagram. And in another video, we are going to explain how the model of the IS curve is actually derived. In the Keynesian cross diagram, we have what is called the actual expenditure and the planned expenditure. The diagram will be coming in very soon, but here is the keywords we have to understand very well. It's very, very pertinent. Now, this actual expenditure shows the real expenditure that takes place in the economy. What do I mean? I mean the total goods or the total value of goods and services that are produced or that actually produced in the economy is known as the actual expenditure. In other words, we are looking at the summation of all the consumption expenditure, investment expenditure, and the government expenditure. The planned expenditure is the intended expenditure. That is the spending that the consumer or the investor or the government intends to make is what we call the planned expenditure. Now, let me elaborate my explanation so that we can understand better, because without understanding this well, I'm scared that we might not understand the IS curve. Now, the actual expenditure, let's take this for example. A business firm does not only produce the goods that they want to sell now, they also produce the one they intend to sell in the future. Now, the one they produce and intend to sell now is known as the planned expenditure. That is, it contains the planned expenditure. However, the one they produce now and do not intend to sell it now, that is, they intend to sell it in a later day, is what we call the unplanned expenditure. Now, this unplanned and planned expenditure actually includes the goods that are produced. It includes the total goods that are produced. So the summation of this planned and unplanned gives us what? Actual expenditure. This is to tell you that the actual expenditure entails the real what, or the total production that takes place in the economy. However, the one we intend to sell now includes what? The planned expenditure. It is as simple as that. Therefore, mathematically, we can say our aggregate expenditure is equal to the planned expenditure plus the unplanned expenditure. According to the Keynesian cross diagram, the planned expenditure equals consumption expenditure plus investment expenditure plus government expenditure. Here we are considering a closed economy. This TM must be a mistake. I'm very sorry for this. So our planned expenditure here will equal the consumption expenditure plus investment expenditure plus government expenditure and nothing else. So what we have here is just telling us that consumption is dependent on both income and tax. And we should know that the higher the income, the higher the consumption, the higher the tax, the lower the consumption. Now let's look at the Keynesian cross diagram. Here is the Keynesian cross diagram. As you can see, the actual expenditure line, and here is the planned expenditure line. There are proofs for how this planned expenditure line is gotten, but we can't see that. We won't explain that in this video. That will be in another video. This actual expenditure line is also called the reference line, and we can see it divides this quadrant into two, and this is telling us that at every point of this actual expenditure line, the aggregate expenditure is equals to what? National income. So therefore, if aggregate expenditure is 60 here, national income will also be what? 60 here. This point shows the point of equilibrium. That is, the economy is in equilibrium when actual expenditure in the economy is equals to the what? Planned expenditure, and this is point A here. And this is telling us that there are no what? Unplanned expenditure. Please don't be confused. There are no what? Planned expenditure, since the actual expenditure is equals to the planned expenditure. So at this point here, the equilibrium is established. We have our equilibrium what? Income here. So anywhere below or above the equilibrium denotes disequilibrium, and this means what? We have changes in unplanned expenditure. If you don't understand that, just leave that. Don't get yourself confused. Now, also we'll be looking at how fiscal policy, we'll be looking at the fiscal policy and multiplier. And under the fiscal policy, we have what we call the government purchases and tax. How does these two things affect the aggregate or the Keynesian what? Cross diagram? So we're back here. Let's take for instance that there is an increase in government expenditure. Since government expenditure is a component of the planned expenditure, then the planned expenditure line will what? Increase. And that's why if government expenditure increases, the planned expenditure line will increase from this line we have here to this line. I'm sorry, I should have labeled this. Pardon me for that. Firstly, the equilibrium is established here. Here is the initial equilibrium. An increase in government expenditure shifts this planned expenditure line to what we have here. and another equilibrium is what established here. This means an increase in government expenditure increases national income from Y0 to what? Y2. So it goes the other way around. If there is a fall in government expenditure, the planned expenditure line shifts from where? From here to here. That is from this line to this line. And another equilibrium is established here. This means the equilibrium level of national income will also fall from Y0 to what? To Y1. So this is of less concern to us for now because it's actually dealing with the theory of liquidity preference, and I don't think we'll be able to look at that in this video. But let's ride on. Now, under the IS curve, we'll also be looking at the fiscal policy and the multiplier, like I've said. So we have the government purchases and tax. We've looked at how government purchases affect the Keynesian cross diagram, but what about tax? An increase in tax will affect the consumption expenditure because increase in taxation reduces the what? Disposable income of household. As a result, consumption falls. And when consumption falls, the planned expenditure will also what? Fall. Let's say this is the initial planned expenditure line, then an increase in taxation will reduce consumption expenditure from this line to this line, and another equilibrium will be what? Established. So therefore, national income falls from Y0 to Y1. The same thing applicable when we have an increase in tax, then the consumption expenditure line or the planned expenditure line will shift from here to here, and we have a higher what? Equilibrium level of national income. Now, the multiplier effect, we should know that when there is a change in government expenditure, the change in income is not always proportional to the change in government expenditure. Instead, the effect is always higher, and this is due to the multiplier what? Effect. So this is just a step on how to prove, but we're not considering that in this video. This is for those who want to understand it. What we have here is the summation of all the values. That is, the government expenditure will always increase by the value of MPC we have in the economy. Every household will spend the portion of the income they spend on consumption is known as the MPC, that is the extra income they have. The proportion of the consumption is what we call the MPC. So the total change in income will now be the summation of all this we have here to infinity, and that's why we are having plus dash 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 here. If we should bring out change in government expenditure, we'll be left with this, and here we have our multiplier. So the total income, real GDP, or the total national income in the economy will increase by the change in government expenditure multiplied by the multiplier we have for the government expenditure. Like what we have here, we are going back to the diagram. If the planned expenditure or government expenditure moves from here to here, the change in the income will be greater than the initial change in government expenditure. As a result, what we have here will be greater than the change in G here. So the same thing also applicable to the tax multiplier. Whenever tax changes, there's always a greater effect. For example, this is the tax multiplier we have here. This means that when there is when taxation increases, then the real GDP or national income will fall by this level. I said fall because taxation and national income are what? Negatively related. So therefore, if taxation should increase, what happens to the planned expenditure line? It falls from this point to this point, and the effect on national income will be greater that is the national income, will fall from Y0 to Y1 by a greater effect, and the greater effect it's what we have here, the minus MPC over 1 minus MPC times the change in C. Thank you very much for listening. The next class we are going to continue with the IS curve. Please do not forget to like, subscribe, and put your comment there so that we can serve you better. Thank you.